Hello, listening audience. Thank you again for downloading the podcast. This is Noggin Notes, and I'm Jake Wiskerson, your host. Today we have on a really wonderful lady named Loice Swisher. She is a medical doctor, an emergency medicine physician at that, and she's really active in the suicide prevention community. She's got an amazing story. It's a little heart-wrenching, and I think you're going to find it fascinating because the story itself has propelled her to make substantial changes in her own world and within her professional community. She does a great job talking about it, and it's inspiring. So I think you're going to enjoy it. This podcast is brought to you, as always, by Zephyr Wellness, a company that I co-own with my co-owner, Lindsay Bell, in Reno and Sparks, Nevada. We serve all stripes of people, and we take all kinds of insurance. And even the insurances we don't take will not turn you away, because you can see one of our talented graduate students who are working their way through their practicum hours to get out of school and get licensed as a full-fledged clinician. And that makes everybody happy because they get to get training. We get to be their mentors, and the community gets excellent care. Check out zephyrwellness.org for more information. You can download tons of media on there as well. Content like this podcast. Go to our YouTube channel, our Instagram channel, our Facebook channel. I don't know if there's channels or accounts or whatever, but that's where you can get new, cool, free information. We're also sponsored by Audible. And if you like feeding your noggin, as we try to do with Noggin Notes, you can feed it through Audible's unmatched selection of inventory, all sorts of audio content, including books and news and comedy and all sorts of entertainment. Audibletrial.com/Noggin Notes is where you can go for a free 30-day trial. You can get a free audiobook downloaded during that trial. And even if you decide to cancel, you keep the audiobook. And it helps us out too. Audibletrial.com/Noggin Notes. Go check them out. It's awesome. And without further ado, here's my interview with Dr. Loice Swisher. Say that 3 times fast. She's from Pennsylvania, and this is Noggin Notes. Enjoy. Well, listening audience, this week on Noggin Notes, we have Loice Swisher joining us. And I think one unique thing to point out about Loice is she has her name spelled Loice. Hello, Loice. Good evening.
Good evening. It's great to be here. Thanks for asking me on my podcast.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you. You're an emergency medicine physician. You live in Pennsylvania, and we connected because of my involvement with Walk the Talk America, and you happen to have stumbled upon us somehow. I'm not sure what the story is. Maybe you could tell that at some point. But you have a particular interest in suicide prevention and specifically suicide by firearm and how it affects the physician community. And so, yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself, including your name spelling, and how you came to be on this podcast.
Sure. Well, there's a lot there. So I am an emergency medicine physician practicing outside of Philadelphia. And a few years ago, I became involved with a group called the Council of Residency Directors for Emergency Medicine. And this is a group that's interested in teaching emergency medicine. And I became part of that group not as a residency director, but as someone interested in resilience and wellness and supporting our residents and students towards good mental health. In that time, I met several people, and I was the only person from my hospital that was involved in this organization. So I learned to make calls and connect with people, and I love doing that. So the way I got to you was I was on a phone call that Mike Savini was on, and he was talking about Walk the Talk America. I got on the website, and I'm like, that's really interesting. I think I'd like to talk to him. He is on the email chain that this all came through. I can get his email. So I wrote him an email, and we started talking, and he introduced me to you. And since then, it's a great thing to meet different people. So
I agree. It's been cool talking to you over the last several months too. And just for a little piece of transparency. You and I tried to do this many months ago. We tried to do it by phone back when I had a different computer that was not working so well. And it turns out we got like 45 or 50 minutes into the podcast, and darn if my computer wasn't recording the whole conversation. So technology has not been our friend, yours and mine. This particular podcast is on take 3 anyway, which is one of the good things about podcasts. You can just stop and start and reset and all that stuff. It's different from live radio. So yeah, I'm really glad that we connected, because what we've discovered, I guess, you and I and some of our clinical community, is that what Mike is doing with Walk the Talk America needs our input. Largely, we don't have a lot of physicians and clinicians contributing to the conversation. It was largely just him and his work with the firearms industry to try to spread information, and not a lot of mental health or physical health even support. So I'm really stoked that you're on board, because you connected us with Emmy Betts, I believe, or maybe vice versa. I can't remember how that worked, but now we're starting to reach out and spread the message. So that's pretty cool. Tell us about your name. It's a family name, right? Makes you an easy Google search.
It does. My grandmother was also named Lois, and my mom named me that, and I am one of only 2 people, my grandmother and myself, that I know that has that name. So it does make me an easy Google search. And I do sort of use that a little bit, because I know I'm easy to find. I do look to see in those things that I'm interested in how I might have a digital footprint. And in this that we're talking about right now, I don't have a digital footprint. Not so much, maybe just a little bit.
Yeah, you do have your story, though, and I want you to tell about that, because for you, it's very personal, this interest in suicide prevention and how we can normalize the conversation so that people seek help when they need it and not feel stigmatized and closeted within their own professions. So you have this published, you've written about it, you've been interviewed about it a number of times. Explain to our audience what your story is, as it pertains to your daughter, and so on and so forth.
I'll definitely go there. But as I was listening to you and thinking, how we came together with Walk the Talk America and myself was through a phone call dealing with suicide by firearms. Mm-hmm. And I am not a firearms owner. There is nothing about this that would make anybody think that I would be looking towards Walk the Talk America for any reason at all. But because I developed an interest in suicide prevention, I happened to be on a phone call where Mike Sodini was the speaker, and he was talking about what the firearms community was doing. In Pennsylvania, they had decided that they wanted to start a gun shop project where we reach out to gun shops and talk about suicide prevention, because most likely your best chance of preventing suicide with firearms is with somebody who owns one. And so there was the suggestion that we go out and go to gun shops and see what the response is and take the flyers that we have with us and go. So I decided I would. I had never gone before, and I went alone. People later said, "Weren't you scared?" I'm like, not really. I just didn't know what I was going to say. This was pre-COVID, so you could actually walk in the store and talk with multiple people. And this is last summer. And I went in, and the first time I started talking, I realized that firearms owners and emergency physicians were exactly the same. Both groups have this feeling that if you talk about suicide, something very personal and important to you can be taken away. For a physician, that's your license. You're credentialing at a hospital, because when you go through all your processes to renew your license, many states have a little checkbox that say, have you ever seen a psychiatrist, or something about mental health, and every state's a little different. even if you have a state that just says you have a disability that prevents you from working to your full capacity. Like if you're being seen because of marriage counseling or depression and have it under control, you don't have to tell us. It's only if there's something more than that would affect patients or your job. Well, that's great if you're in one state, but what if 5 years down the line, you go to another state that says, have you ever seen a psychiatrist? Or the hospital that you're trying to be credentialed at says that. You can't predict the rest of your future, so nobody wants to take the chance, even if you're in a place that seems to be more safe, more interested in mental health.
Yeah, and if I can cut in right there, that right there speaks to the stigma that's perpetuated about mental illness, is that it's somehow irrecoverable. Like you can't ever heal from it. It's like once broken, always broken, and that's just not true. I mean, it's just simply not true. If it were, and I've said this a million times in a million different places by now, I think, if it were true, my profession would cease to exist because nobody could heal. You'd be permanently broken, and we just know it's not true. So, and yet it still hangs out there as though it's some sort of impediment to occupation, which is really, really sad.
Yes, and it's with us, with physicians, with healthcare. So
that's amazing.
The people that you think that you would be going to may harbor this feeling that it's dangerous for them. It may be okay for patients, maybe,
yeah.
but it's definitely not safe for me. And if you then haven't experienced it or know the results of that type of interaction, then it's going to be less recommended. And so for me, it not only affects physicians, but it affects our entire population. So I felt like it was something really worth talking about. And in getting to the firearms owners, it's like, yes, we're the same. We're the same as police. We're the same as pilots. We're the same as veterans, that when you start talking about mental health issues, that there's this fear and this stigma that somehow something will be taken away from you, or you will no longer belong. And that belonging, it would be more painful not to belong than to be dead.
Yeah, and I think now it's amazing because as many times I've had this conversation and given the explanation about how proud I am that we've unlocked multiple different professional communities with this, because it's attorneys also to some degree, that's anybody with a government security clearance, firefighters, so it's not just the professionals who have a license or a job where they may be deemed, unfit for duty, quote unquote. But now you talk about the belonging. We've got families who've generationally just disregarded their mental well-being, their emotional well-being for that same reason. And if you go seek help, there's this mentality among families and certainly among different cultures that you could be excommunicated from that family or that cultural nuance. And that speaks to the belonging, right? And that's one of, William Glasser's a famous guy in our field. One of his 5 fundamental basic human needs is love and belonging. So imagine the risk associated with seeking help if you thought that you would lose your belonging, irrespective of any career impact. Wow. I had never considered that of all the things that I've discussed about this. So this is why I love the podcast, by the way. I learned stuff that I didn't even expect to learn. So thank you for that. Great point.
Yeah. So when you talk about my story started a little over 20 years ago, the major part, the one that's out there. And my then 5-year-old daughter was having some unexplained vomiting. And being a physician, I realized that she could potentially have a brain tumor. She had this unexplained vomiting, occasionally would have a headache. And when I was a 3rd-year medical student, one of my mentors talked to me about a case that came into the emergency department. There was a child at St. Christopher's, preschooler, who had been bounced in and out of multiple visits maybe 5 or 6 visits from the emergency department.